pyramidal tract is known as cortico. It is otherwise called as
Corticospinal and corticonuclear tract.
from the cortex.
Corticospinal and corticonuclear tract.
Yes, corticospinal, corticonuclear, or corticobulbar. You are right. But where does it start from? The bed cells of the motor cortex, is it? And then it
Yes,
passes
sir.
through what is the course of the pyramidal tract? How will you trace it out? It starts from the
Bed
cerebral.
cells,
Yeah,
um,
bed cells.
then through corona radiata, ma'am.
Yes, yes. Corona radiator. Again, it is scattered. Yes.
Then internal capsule, ma'am.
In the internal capsule, it becomes quite dense. It passes through the anterior two-third of the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Yes.
Then decussation.
No, so the decussation comes not so soon. It comes to the, it occupies the middle two-third or three-fifth of the cerebral peduncles in the midbrain. So it occupies the portion of the cerebral peduncles in the midbrain. Then it crosses through the pons. As no, it is passes through the pons, and then it comes to the medulla. Medulla, it occupies the pyramids in the medulla. Then in the lower medulla, it crosses to the opposite side. One part is crossing to the opposite side, and another part is continuing directly. So the decussation always occurs in the brainstem, that is in the lower medulla. So then where it ends? So this direct corticospinal as well as the lateral corticospinal tract, where it ends? It ends
On
in the
anterior horn cells, ma'am.
anterior horn cells. Good. So from the bed cells, corona radiata, then it comes through the internal capsule, then to the midbrain occupying the cerebral peduncles, then in the pons cut by the fibers as no transverse pontine fibers, then it occupies the pyramids of the medulla in the lower medulla, decussates to the opposite side and continues as the lateral corticospinal tract and uncrossed as the direct corticospinal tract, both of which ends in the anterior horn cells. So up to this is the pyramidal tract. So this is actually the upper motor neuron. So anything, this pyramidal as well as extrapyramidal, both are upper motor neuron, but now we are only talking about the pyramidal, that is corticospinal, ends in the anterior horn cells. And the same time concerning the cranial nerves, the cranial nerves again when it from the cortex to the up to the cranial nerve nuclei in the brainstem, that is supranuclear, that is UMN type of cranial nerve palsy. From the brainstem, from the nucleus and below, that is LMN type of cranial nerve palsy. So any paralysis below the anterior horn cells is lower motor neuron, that is the nerve, the muscle from the the individual nerve fibers, anterior horn cells, the nerve fibers, then ending in the muscles, individual muscles. That is your lower motor neuron. Then the upper motor neuron or corticospinal we discussed. Then corticobulbar or corticonuclear is from the cortex ending up to the cranial nerve nuclei. It can be the cranial nerve nuclei. Where are all it situated? What are all the cranial nerve nuclei? You know? In the midbrain, what is the cranial nerve nuclei? Third and fourth?
Oculomotor and trochlear, ma'am.
Yeah, that is third and fourth, oculomotor and trochlear. Then in the pons, you have the
Five.
trigeminal diffusion. Then your
Facial.
Yes.
Motor. Yes. Motor nucleus is facial, ma'am.
Yes, then your vestibulocochlear. So all this the pons. Then comes your medulla. All the lower cranial nerves are in the medulla. So what are all the lower cranial nerves? Your
9
nine
to 12.
name them. That is glossopharyngeal.
Glossopharyngeal and vagus, spinal accessory, and hypoglossal.
Yes. So these are all the cranial nerve nucleus. So from the cortex up to the cranial nerve nucleus, the involvement of the cranial nerves is UMN. Below the nucleus, it is LMN type of cranial nerve paralysis. So you understand to some extent now. So from the cortex to the nucleus, it is corticonuclear or corticobulbar. Yes. Now we come to the presenting complaints of the patient. We saw about the tract. Then you must be knowing also about the sensory. I don't want to discuss about what are all the, which is the tract carrying the sensations. What are all the tracks you know which carry the sensation?
Anterior spinothalamic, lateral spinothalamic, and dorsal column.
Dorsal column or posterior column. Good. It is spinothalamic and the posterior column. So the spinothalamic carries what are all the sensations?
Temperature, pain, crude touch.
Temperature, then
Pain, crude touch.
crude touch.
Dorsal column carries vibration,
Yes.
proprioception, and
Proprioception.
fine touch.
Fine touch, okay. So these are all the things about the sensory tracts, spinothalamic and posterior column. Again, posterior column, the sensations are position sense, vibration sense, touch, again fine touch. More than the fine touch, you have to say fine touch mainly in the lateral spinothalamic. You have to say position, vibration, and the proprioception, that is the joint position vibration. This is by the posterior column. So the patient who is coming to you with a stroke will have, what are all the complaints he will have? That's why we are discussing about the tracks. He will have the motor, yes.
Weakness or inability to use a limb or any limb.
Yes, so weakness or inability to use the one half of the body. That is the hemiparesis or hemiplegia. If it is dense complete weakness, it is hemiplegia. If it is partial, it is hemiparesis. But that is mainly the motor weakness of one side of the body. Then again, you have to ask for sensory loss also. So the motor weakness, how would you want to ask about the history of the motor weakness? That is the proximal muscles, you have to use about the upper limb as well as the lower limb. The proximal muscles of the upper limb, what will be the history? You will be asking whether the patient is able to lift the arm above the shoulders, comb the hair. The distal muscles again mixing the food, writing, and anything, grasping the objects. Objects being,
Buttoning the shirt.
yeah, buttoning and unbuttoning the shirt. And again about the lower limb, the proximal muscles getting up from the squatting position as well as climbing up and down stairs. And then the distal muscles, if the patient can feel the slippers, that also comes with sensory neuropathy. Also sometimes slippers falling off from the feet. So all this is about the distal muscle weakness. Yes. And then you have to ask about the sensory loss that you know. Again, we missed about the cortical sensations. What are all the cortical sensations?
Tactile localization, 2-point discrimination, stereognosis,
Yes. And graphesthesia.
graphesthesia.
Graphesthesia. So graphesthesia, any letter, any number or something, alphabet you write on his back, he will be able to tell. Localization is particular point, he will be able to, with the closed eyes, again he can say this point has been touched. Always sensations, you have to touch, test the sensations with the closed eyes. The eye should not be open. But before doing the test, you have to explain to the patient that you are going to do something and what he has to say that you have to explain to him. Suppose if you are touching with a fine cotton wool, then you have to tell him that you are going to do that and he has to close the eyes, and after opening the eyes he has to point out like which point was touched, he has to say with the closing of the eyes itself. That is for the testing the sensations. So then the complaints, we know the motor weakness we said already. So what would be the associated complaints in a CVA? If it is cortical, the patient can have altered sensorium, convulsions, speech defects, and then the cortical sensory loss may be there. Then typical pyramidal tract lesions, there will be associated UMN type of facial lump palsy can be there. Yes. Why the trunk is not affected in the hemiplegia? Trunk muscles are not affected. Why?
Innervation by the
No, it
anterior
is supplied by C1 to C5, ma'am. So it is below the lesion.
No, you are saying about this thing, spinal cord. I am asking about the trunk muscles. Normally, they are not affected because of the bilateral representation of the cortex. Whereas in case of hemiplegia, when right side is affected, which side will be the lesion again?
Left side.
Left side.
Left side will be the lesion. And when the left dominant hemisphere is going to be affected, you will have mostly the speech defects.
Speech.
Yeah, speech defects. So again, asking about the speech disturbance is very important. Then again, sensory loss, alteration in consciousness. Normally, where you will have alteration in the consciousness, depending upon the etiology, in a hemorrhage or in a thromboembolism. Mostly in a cerebral stage, you will have loss of consciousness. Yes. A lot of other etiological factors are there that I am not going to discuss. Yes, now with the history, whether we'll discuss the history or shall we go for the examination? Or we'll go from the history to the examination? Yes, Pa?
Ma'am,
From history, ma'am.
From history, good. Okay. So now we asked about, so we are now in the motor defects we know. So the motor already I said proximal for the proximal muscles of the upper limb, lower limb, then distal of the upper limb and lower limb, what would be the history we will ask. And again, if it is normally in a UMN type of lesion, what is the difference between UMN and LMN?
Ma'am, in UMN, all the motor neurons above the level of the anterior horn cells, they are involved, and in lower motor neuron, anterior horn cells onwards, all those nerves are involved.
Yes, nerves to the muscles. You are right. But I'm asking clinically, how will you differentiate a human lesion from a element lesion? In a human lesion, the group of muscle or the particular limb, as we see in hemiplegia, upper limb or lower limb or both upper limb and lower limb, it will be affected. But in a element lesion, it will be an individual muscle.
Individual muscle. Yes.
Dermatome that will be affected in the element lesion. For element lesion, you can take all this muscular things, myositis, myopathies. They are most commonly your poliomyelitis. They are due to the muscle per se or the denervation, like poliomyelitis. They are the reason for your element. UMN, we said all this. It is the particular limb or group of muscles are affected. Movement is affected mainly. And human pyramidal tract, actually, what is it supplying? It is mainly important for your fine, skilled movements of the hand, which has most representation in the cortex. It is your
Hand and face.
yes face. Then comes your fingers,
Lip.
and then face, lip. Then comes your fingers, hand. Then comes your shoulders, elbow. Then trunk. Then comes your hip and knee, and then only close to the paracentral sulcus, it will be the feet and things. So the representation is like this in the cerebral cortex. So largest area of representation in a pyramidal tract is for the all this hand and the fine movements, because it is mainly important for the fine finger movements, the pyramidal tract, the voluntary movements. It is very much important. And these are all the last to recover in a pyramidal tract lesion. In a hemiplegia, which will be the last is the finger grasp and the fine finger movements will be the last, because that has a huge representation in the cortex. That would be the last to recover. Yes. And then, where were we now?
Element is UMN, ma'am.
Element and human. Yes, thank you. So again, the muscle wasting or the bulk would be approximately, it would be normal in a case of human lesion, because the wasting or it will not happen immediately. It will happen only after a long time of hemiplegia. Patient is having a residual paralysis, not using. So here the wasting is due to not using, disuse atrophy. That's why it is called as disuse atrophy. But in an element per se, it can cause wasting of the muscle. So easily the wasting occurs. And in case of a element lesion, that is regarding the muscle bulk or nutrition. And in case of the UMN, the tone will be, what is the tone in a pyramidal tract lesion? Increase.
Hypertonia. Hypertonia.
You are right. That is particularly in extrapyramidal also the tone is increased. But here in pyramidal tract, the tone increases in one group of muscles. That is in upper limb, the flexor hypertonia. In the lower limb, extensor hypertonia. And also when you test the tone, how will you test the tone?
passive stretching movements, flexion extension at the elbow and at the
Yeah.
knee.
Yeah, you are right. So here passive means the patient should not move his limb. You have to ask the patient to be quiet and not to do anything, not to resist. So you are going to move the patient's limb. Suppose arm means you are going to move the arm at the joint passively, like elbow, you are going to move the elbow joint, flexing and extending the elbow joint. Then you keep your hand on the biceps or over the upper arm. Then you see how is the tone when you move the joint passively. Or you move the wrist flexion and extension. Here also you see how is the movement. If you feel any increased tone, normal tone, you must know what is the normal tone. Normally you have to see it is not increased. But in the increased tone, you really see the resistance to that passive movement. It is not that patient is resisting the sort of increased tone. In pyramidal tract lesion, after some moment, suddenly this gives away. This is called as clasp knife spasticity. This sort of thing, spasticity, is characteristic of your pyramidal lesion. When you open a closed knife, what happens? The knife, initial you have resistance, then suddenly it gives way. That is called as clasp knife spasticity. You have it in pyramidal lesion. It is due to the tone increase in one group of muscles, that is the anti-gravity muscles. In the upper limb, already I mentioned flexure hypertonia. In the lower limb, it is the extensor hypertonia. That's why the hemiplegic patient keeps the upper limb flexed at the elbow, flexed at the wrist, as well as fingers are flexed, and shoulder will be adducted. Yes, in the lower limb, the limb will be extended, again adducted, and the foot will be plantiflexed. This is a typical hemiplegic posture in paralysis. And again, you see we saw about the tone. So lower limb, what will be here in UMN? In pyramidal tract, it is clasp knife spasticity. Extrapyramidal, like Parkinsonism. Extrapyramidal involvement may be in the basal ganglia, maybe in the red nucleus, where and all it may be. The tone increase is known as rigidity. Why it is rigidity? Because here the tone increase of the agonist and antagonist muscles, the increase in tone is equal. So throughout this passive movement, you will feel the increased tone, and this tone, this is called as lead pipe rigidity. As you are, that will be very, how to say, uniform resistance in the tone. That's why they are saying it as lead pipe. When you move try to move a lead pipe, that is the lead pipe rigidity. And sometimes with the superadded tremor in Parkinsonism, you feel as if you are moving a wheel, cog wheel. The tremor is giving that interrupted feeling. That is the cog wheel rigidity. That is in Parkinsonism. In LMN, what will be the tone? It will be
Hypotonia.
hypotonia. So hypotonia or decreased tone. So here when you move the limbs, you don't feel any resistance to the movement, and also you feel even the normally you feel some tone in the muscles. Here in UMN it is increased. In the LMN you don't feel the resistance to the passive movement at all. You feel it as if you are simply, it is loosely moving. To say exactly, it is moving very easily or very freely or loosely. It is due to the decreased tone and flabby muscles. That is in, sometimes you can say, even the range of movements you feel it is really moving to a larger extent rather than what is the movement expected. That is like a fly limb. When you keep it loose, it will be moving just like that. So that is a fly limb hypotonia in a element. And wasting already we discussed. Here wasting will be more prominent. And what about the reflexes? The superficial and deep reflexes in UMN. Superficial reflexes, most commonly we say only our abdominal reflexes. It will be present or absent in UMN and LMN. What is the difference? Are there no difference?
It will be
About
exaggerated in UMN, ma'am.
No, you are not right, because the superficial reflexes are abdominal reflexes and cremastic reflex and anal reflex. They may be present or they can be lost also in a human lesion. But in a element lesion, they are lost. Okay, we are talking about the superficial reflexes, not the deep reflexes. As you say, the deep reflexes are brisk or exaggerated. So what are all the superficial reflexes? Tell me.
Corneal reflex, conjunctival reflex.
Corneal conjunctival reflex. What is the nerve supply?
Afferent for both of them is the trigeminal nerves ophthalmic division, ma'am. And the efferent would be the facial cranial nerve 7.
Yes, good. The center is already, you know, it is in the pons. Yes. So now it is about the corneal conjunctival. Then what is we said about your abdominal reflex? What is the root value of abdominal reflexes? How will you do elicit abdominal reflex?
Ma'am, root value would be T8 to T12, ma'am.
Yes. So what are all the quadrants? You will test upper, middle, and lower. You have to do it from the outer to the scratch it from outer to the inner, and always you have to tell the patient. Always stand on the right side of the patient, tell the patient you are going to do it. And you scratch from the key or something, a blunt object from outer aspect of the abdomen to the inner. 3 quadrants, the upper, middle and lower. So normally you see a reflex contraction of the muscles. When it is not there, then it is lost. So in the human lesion, mostly it is lost. It can be present also. But in a element lesion, it is definitely lost. And so superficial reflexes are abdominal reflex, your cremasteric reflex, your bulbocavernous, your anal reflex. But which is the main, and also very important superficial reflex you forgot, what is it?
Plantar reflex.
Plantar reflex. So commonly you examine corneal conjunctival, the abdominal reflexes and the plantar. Cremasteric in a male patient, if you want to do, you can do it, especially the boys, but otherwise it is not really required. When you do the abdominal reflexes, the plantar reflex and the corneal conjunctival, that is enough for the superficial reflexes. So we saw how it is in a human lesion, how it is in a element. So what about the plantar? What is a normal plantar? How it will be in a human lesion? How will you do a plantar reflex? What is the root value?
Ma'am, root value would be L4 S5 and L4 L5 S1 and S2, ma'am.
L5S1. So L5S1, how will you do it?
Ma'am, we're supposed to take a blunt object and we're supposed to stroke the patient's lateral side of the foot, and from the heel to the base of the fifth toe, ma'am.
Yeah.
And if needed, stroke over up to the base of the big toe also, ma'am.
Yes. So for this, the knee has to be lightly flexed, and then you just gently do the this thing. You just mild stretching of the foot, knee slightly flexed. Then you stroke it from the heel lateral aspect, from the base, or that is from the heel on the lateral aspect of the sole, up to the base of the little toe. Then you draw it medially across up to the base of the great toe if it is needed. So this is the eliciting the plantar reflex. So what would be the response normally?
Normally, this flexion withdrawal of the foot.
Flexion,
Huh?
flexion of what?
Flexion of the knee and hip, and flexion of all the toes as well. And
Flexion of the great toe, ma'am, and the fanning of the other toe, other fingers,
Yes.
other toe.
Other toes. So extension of the great toe or dorsiflexion and fanning out of the, followed by fanning or extension of the other toes, can be associated with the, this is the extensor plantar extensor. So now we are talking about the
normal.
normal will be flexion of the great toe, or then the flexion of the other toes. Then there can be a flexion of the knee or not.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if it is abnormal, so this is the normal plantar response. This would be lost in a human type of lesion, pyramidal tract lesion, and also it won't be there in an infant. Before the complete myelination of the pyramidal tract, it would be lost. When they start walking after 1 year, when the child starts walking, then this extensor plantar, the flexor response appear. Otherwise, the extensor response in the infant before walking is normal. but it is pathological. Plantar response is otherwise called as Babinski response. It is pathological. So we discuss about the flexor. What is the extensor response? Extension of the great toe followed by fanning out of the other toes. You have to watch the metatarsophalangeal joint. Sometimes the great toe may not be that much extended, but there will be a extension of the metatarsophalangeal joint. Here, extension means dorsiflexion. Flexion means plantar flexion. That you know. Then followed by flexion of the knee and the hip. This is for the extensor plantar response. So this is abnormal. You typically get it in a pyramidal tract lesion. Where and all it is absent. Where you expect a absent extensor plantar response. If the sole of the patient is very thick, sometimes you may not get a extensor plantar response.
The
And then,
lower
yeah,
element palsy, ma'am.
element palsy. Sometimes element palsy of the particular area dermatome is affected. It may not be there. Yes, you are right. So this is about the extensor plantar response. Sometimes in a pyramidal tract lesion, you can elicit the extensor response. If the area of this reflexogenic area increases, you can elicit this extensor plantar response by other ways. What are all the other ways? By pinching the calcaneum, by squeezing the calf muscles, by pressing on the tibia from above downwards. There are names for this. Exactly, you must say it is Gordon's. All this, there are names. So you can get an extensor plantar response because in a pyramidal lesion, the reflexogenic area for the stimulation of this plantar response increases. So not really by the scratching the from the heel to the base of the little toe and then drawing medially across, you get it. Also by pinching the calcaneum, squeezing the calf muscles and pressing above downwards on the tibia. That is Oppenheim reflex. I think squeezing, I don't know which is Gordon's maybe pinching calcaneum. I'm not really sure. So these are all the other methods in the pyramidal tract when it is the reflexogenic areas increases. So when the examiner asks, you can answer that. So about the extensor plantar response visa, is there any other difference? I think we have discussed about the differences between the UMN and LMN. What about the DTR? We forget about the DTR. Is it very important?
Yes, ma'am.
Deep reflexes. What are all the deep tendon reflexes you know? In the upper limb, it is biceps. Yes.
Biceps, triceps, and supinator.
Supinator. Then in the lower limb,
Lower limb, we have the knee jerk, ma'am. Ankle
yeah,
jerk and
knee and ankle jerk. Plantar is superficial reflex.
yes.
So the deep tendon reflexes will be normally, you must know the root value. What is the root value of biceps? Biceps and supinator are the same, I think. C5, C6 is it?
Yes, sir. C5, C6 for biceps, I think supinator C6, C7.
For triceps.
Triceps, yes, sir.
Okay, so how would you do the biceps?
We would be supporting the forearm of the patient, ma'am.
Yes.
And then thumb over the biceps tendon and then slightly strike the thumb over the finger, ma'am.
Yeah, so you can do it by the patient in supine position. The elbow is not very much flexed. That is partly only minimal flexion, just lying loosely on the bed also you can do it. And then also you can do it in a sitting position. You can just keep his forearm over your forearm, then gently, but the forearm is, the elbow is not flexed, just it is partly, it is mostly in a extended position. Then you are going to strike the biceps tendon. What would be the response when the biceps contracts? There will be a flexion of the elbow. For eliciting the triceps, you have to keep the arm across, the flexed arm across the chest. Then you strike the triceps above the olecranon process. Feel the tendon of the triceps and strike it above the olecranon process. Then there will be an extension of the elbow. For the supinator, what we'll do?
The forearm should be in the mid pronated position.
Yes. Then you strike on the stylar process of the radius.
Yes.
Then with what is the response? There will be supination of the forearm due to brachioradialis contraction. That is for your this thing. So what is knee jerk? What is the root value? L2, L3, L4. So how will you elicit a knee jerk?
Patient's legs should be crossed. The ankle should be resting on the opposite knee, or and the tendon can be struck above the tibial tuberosity.
Yeah, so one thing, you're keeping your hand underneath the knee, supporting the knee, then it can rest on the ankle, can rest on the opposite side leg. And you strike the patellar tendon and you see the contraction of the quadriceps causing extension of the knee. That is about, you can watch for the contraction of the quadriceps also causing the extension of the knee. That is about the knee jerk. Also, you can elicit the knee jerk by asking the patient sitting on the edge of the chair, or then the leg hanging freely. Here also you can elicit the knee jerk. And for the ankle, what would you do? What is the root value? It is L5S1, is it? Then how will you elicit it? Ankle jerk.
Patient has to lie prone, ma'am.
You can do it. Patient can kneel down. One position is kneel down. No need to lie prone. He can lie down in a supine position itself. You are not going to look for the prone thing. Supine position, gently stretch the foot and partly flex the knee. And you feel this tendo Achilles. You strike on the tendo Achilles, lower part, you can understand what I mean.
Yes, ma'am.
Above the heel, you feel the tendon with the knee gently flexed, and then the partly stretch the foot. Then you strike the tendo Achilles. Then striking this will cause the contraction of the hamstrings. That is for your this thing. What is that? Your ankle jerk. It would be normally, all these reflexes, DT or will be normally present. What are all the grading of the reflexes? Deep tendon reflexes. Zero is absent. 1 is flickering. 2 is gravity eliminated. 3 is against gravity. 4 is against resistance. Is it? Grading of the reflexes. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Yeah. So this is the grade. So normally, I think I am saying about the power. It is not the grade. I am sorry.
It sounds like the MRC grading, ma'am, for power.
So power, what I said is about the power. Power, when you say a power, we will come next. Now we are with the DTR.
Yes.
So DTR, if it is normally present, it is what? Just present. And then brisk, then exaggerated, and then again clonus. So there are how many grades in the DTR? 4 grades.
4 grades.
So brisk means normally present is like a simple ankle jerk. Normally the knee jerk, it would be a brisk thing
Brisk.
in any. So brisk means you can take it like if it is brisk, easily present like a knee jerk, then you can say it is brisk. Exaggerated, you feel very well simply by stretching, like tapping the tendon, then it is very much spontaneous response. That is exaggerated. What is clonus? By giving the repeated stimulus, like pressing the patellar tendon from patella from above downwards, or dorsiflexing the forefoot for ankle clonus. By giving the repeated stimulus, you have the contractions of more than sustained contractions of the muscle more than 3 times. Sustained contractions, not the ill-sustained. That is clonus. And the clonus is commonly present in your condition. And brisk and exaggerated reflex is also present in the human lesion. So when you have the DTR, which is brisk or exaggerated, or you have a clonus, that means the human lesion. It is a upper motor neuron or pyramidal tract lesion. When the reflexes are not at all there, completely absent, or they are very much diminished, it is very, very difficult for you to elicit. Then it is decreased reflexes or areflexia indicates what lesion? LMN lesion. So with this, we complete the difference between UMN and LMN. And also power, we are not going to discuss in the difference between the UMN and LMN. We are going to discuss only with the examination. So now can we, how we will do? Like we are in the history also, we are discussing with the examination part. So we'll do simultaneously like that as an interactive thing. So motor weakness, you are going to ask about the motor weakness. Then you are also going to ask about predominantly the patient will say, I am not able to use my limb. Suddenly the patient would be sleeping or wake, while getting up from the sleep, he would notice that he is not able to use the upper limb, lower limb. And then also sometimes it might be associated with transient loss of consciousness and your speech defects. The patient may not be able to talk. Either it will be a slurred speech, he can comprehend, he can understand what they are talking, or the speech may be completely lost also. So the aphasia component you have to see, the motor defect and the loss in consciousness. Then about the sensory. Sensory, you will again ask about patient, how we will ask, elicit the sensory complaints. You will ask whether he can feel the
Hot sensation, clothes, floor.
or any prick, insect bite, and then again the cold. So like that you will elicit the history. So we don't go much in the history. And then motor, sensory, the higher functions, that is consciousness, speech, motor and sensory. Then you can ask the patient or patient's attender. Suppose if the patient is not going to talk, the attender only will be giving you the history. So he is called an informant. So you have to say whether the informant history is reliable or not. Then you have to ask whether the patient is right-handed or left-handed, because you may not find out if the patient is going to have a right-sided hemiplegia. You may not know he is right-handed or left-handed. So how will you elicit the handedness? The patient not.
We ask the person to look through a look at
Yeah.
Pinhole. Pinhole.
pinhole.
Hole, yes, which eye he is using, that is one thing. Also cross folding the arms over the chest, sometimes he keeps a dominant arm. Mostly the looking through the pinhole would be ideal. So you can say that particular eye he sees through is the side is the dominant side. Then again about the motor sensory we discussed. Then anything else you would ask, you will also ask about
Involuntary movements.
involuntary movements. Then if he can walk, if the paralysis is not severe, can he walk? About the gait, history, not much you would be able to get with the history. And then again you have to ask about the bladder and bowel disturbance. Was there any incontinence of urine? It is quite rare. It is also in case of cortical hemiplegia, with the involvement of the anterior cerebral artery supplying the paracentral lobules, you will have predominantly the lower limb weakness, that is caudal lower limb weakness with the bladder involvement can be there in the hemiplegia also, but it is quite unlikely in a hemiplegia bladder involvement. Sometimes there can be transient evacuation of the stools during the episode. So bladder bowel involvement. Then you have to ask about the autonomic dysfunction. Other than this, you will be asking about disproportionate sweating, or you will be looking for postural drop in the BP.
Yes.
Whether there is any difference between the sitting posture and the standing posture. All these things you have to look for the autonomic nervous system. Then you have to ask about what else you will ask. The extrapyramidal, again you said involuntary movements.
If the patient feels the limb to be loose.
Yeah, that and all comes in the motor in detail. That comes in the motor in the low element weakness, or even in the spinal shock, you will have hypotonia. So he might feel like that, because what is spinal shock or neuronal shock?
It happens immediately after UMN or spinal trauma, ma'am.
In the human nation, immediately within hours to days, or sometimes up to 2 to 3 weeks, you will have a spinal shock, because initially the lesion, sometimes it can have a depressant effect. The pyramidal lesion, when it occurs suddenly, it can have a depressing effect on your spinal column. That's why you have this. Because of the depressant effect, the reflexes will be lost. When this effect is going, the spinal shock is going, then the normal typical Leumann findings of the pyramidal tract lesion will appear. During the period of spinal shock, you will have again loss of reflexes. Even the plantar also you couldn't elicit much. That is the period of spinal shock. Yes. Or
Hypotonia
some,
will be there, no?
yeah, the tone
Hypo-
also, that may not be there. You will have all the element findings. When the patient recovers from the spinal shock, one thing what you can, which can help you is the facial palsy. Suppose if the patient is going to have a Eumann facial palsy, when you say the facial palsy is Eumann, only
Sparing
the
it
lower,
upper half.
sparing the upper part. Why? In the facial nerve alone, you have a Eumann palsy. Because the facial nerve has the upper part is represented bilaterally. Lower part of the facial nerve is always supplied by the opposite side fibers. So the lower part is affected only in the unilateral involvement of the facial nerve. Eumann lesion. Can you understand what I mean?
Yes, ma'am.
So if upper part escapes because of the bilateral representation, even if there is a lesion on one side, but because the lower part is represented unilaterally, it is affected. That is the Eumann lesion of the cranial nerve. That is facial nerve. When you say the lower half of the face is affected, you say it is a Eumann lesion. That means where is the lesion of the facial nerve?
Above the motor nucleus of facial motor nucleus, the frontopontine fibers.
Good. So above the pons, then you know very well here it is above the facial nerve involvement is above the pons, Eumann type of facial nerve lesion. So it is associated with the pyramidal tract, same side hemiplegia. Then you know very well it is the pyramidal tract lesion. You have a Eumann facial palsy. Same side hemiplegia means it is due to the pyramidal tract involvement. You are not able to elicit the reflexes or extensor plantar response. It is not typical Eumann finding because of the stage of the neuronal shock. Maybe after few days when you test, all the findings of the Eumann, brisk reflexes and increased tone and your extensor plantar response will appear. So this facial palsy can give a clue, Eumann facial palsy, that the pyramidal tract is involved because it is above the level of the facial nerve nucleus. Yes, good. So then, where are we now? We are discussing about the history wise. So do you want to, I think with this we complete the autonomic nervous system, we said spine and cranium, and then extrapyramidal we said cerebellum also you have to ask what is mainly the function of the extrapyramidal. It maintains the posture and the movement, and cerebellum again, typical history for cerebellum you will be asking about the any intention tremor or any incoordination, all these things. Then again in the sensory, you have to ask for the posterior column involvement. You have to ask whether the patient has any incoordination in the door. That is for the posterior column involvement. So with this, the history is complete. Then past history, again, you have to ask for the similar CVA in the past or any history of TIA or any drug he is taking, any heart disease he is having. Risk factors, again, hypertension, diabetes are risk factors. Smoking is a risk factor. All these things you have to ask. And sometimes in IV drug abuse like cocaine and all, it can also cause thrombosis. They are prone for a stroke. Good. So then next what will be asked? Past history.
Personal in past history, dog bite, recent vaccination.
That and all is for demyelination. So it is only for completion sake you are asking, but you ask that. So past history, similar episode, that is very important. And etiological history only you are going to ask about the illnesses like hypertension, diabetes, and then any drugs he is taking, any heart disease he is having. Why heart disease? They can again have a
Embolism.
Fibrillation.
thromboembolism is quite common. And then in hypertension, again, atherosclerosis with thrombosis. Then with diabetes, again, the vessels are affected. There can be hyperlipidemia and all these things. and smoking, homocysteine, increased homocysteine, and then prone for again spasm and the thrombosis. Accentuated atherosclerosis. Yes. So again with the history now, I think we can go for the examination part. So we can go for the examination part a bit. History, anything else in the history you want to ask? Anything else in the history you want to ask?
And maybe in history of presenting illness, features of increased intracranial tension.
Okay,
Like
so that
vomiting, headache.
more than history of presenting illness. Yes, even you can ask in the history of presenting illness also. So where you will have increased intracranial tension.
Hemorrhagic stroke.
Good. So in a hemorrhagic stroke, he can have a seizure, he can have a vomiting, he can have a loss of consciousness, headache. So all these things can be there in a hemorrhagic stroke, and also headache, vomiting, and fever and all can be there in a meningitis or any CNS infection. Encephalitis, it can be there. Yes, fine. Then what else, Pa? Now we are with etiological history. You have to elaborate. And then similar episode we said drug history, past history, the whatever the etiologies we have discussed. So how will you summarize and say? Suppose you have presented a case now. How will you summarize? This many year old patient has come with weakness or difficulty in using the left upper and lower limb with the involvement of the facial nerve of the same side, left side, and then so how will you give the complaints of facial nerve involvement? I think we have missed the cranial nerves. So cranial nerves, the history wise, you want to again say or shall we go to the examination part?
We can move to examination now.
Examination part. So facial nerve, normally the history you will ask is any history of deviation of the angle of the mouth to the opposite side. That would be the history you would ask for the facial nerve. So involvement of the weakness of the left upper and lower limb with the left lower weakness of the left lower half of the face, that is the human facial palsy on the left side. If the speech is involved with the speech difficulty in speaking or a slurred speech, the probable lesion here would be it is a suspecting a stroke. The probable site of lesion is on the right side internal capsule. And the etiology, depending upon if you feel it is a thrombosis, if you feel that patient has a hemorrhage means it will be a dense hemiplegia, the patient will not have consciousness, all these things. If it is a thrombosis, again sleep onset. Commonly we say sleep onset. If it is during any activity, we say it is embolism. So possible etiology, thromboembolism or hemorrhage, and the site of lesion is in the left side hemiplegia, left human facial palsy means the site of lesion is in the right internal capsule. Yes. So this would be you would be completing the history. Then general examination, what would we look for in a general examination of CNS? Tell me. Apart from patient cyanosis, clubbing, all these things will leave.
Neurocutaneous marker.
Yes, neurocutaneous markers. So neurocutaneous markers, what are the neurocutaneous markers?
For tuberous sclerosis, my adenoma, sebaceum, Sjagren patches, and ash leaf macules. Ma'am.
Leaf macules, yes, good. Then Lish nodules, the fungus,
Lish-
yes. Yes. Then
Um,
for neurofibroma,
Neurofibromatosis, we look for if there are many neurofibromas and cafe au lait spots.
more than how many are significant?
More than 5, ma'am.
Okay, 5. Yes, then the size also is significant. You just see how much, what is the size, significant size. So the capillate spots, the presence of neurofibromas, then the suspicious of tuberous sclerosis. Also, you have to look for hemangiomas or nevus. Any hemangiomas and nevus, sometimes it can be associated with berry-aneurysms in the inside the brain. Yes, and then other than this, the neurocutaneous markers, you have to look for features of dyslipidemia. What would be the features and features of atherosclerosis? So, what would be the
Xanthoma. Xanthoma.
xanthomas? Good. Xanthelasma, then earlobe crease, then what else? Arcus senilis. Yes. Then what is this locomotor brachii? Look for
It's due to atherosclerosis of brachial artery, ma'am. There will be the bulging of brachial artery with each
prominent
systole.
pulsation, more than the
Prominent.
bulging. Prominent pulsation. When you partly flex the elbow and see, you can see very easily see the pulsations of the brachial artery. Normally, in the young patient, when you see this locomotor brachii, you take it in case of one of the peripheral signs of AR. But in a patient with a stroke, middle age, due to atherosclerosis, this is prominent. Locomotor brachii indicates atherosclerosis, thickening of the vessel wall due to atherosclerosis. Carotid also, there can be kinking of the carotid. And all these things you look for, prominent temporal artery. So these are all, you are looking for the features of atherosclerosis, features of dyslipidemia, then neurocutaneous markers. Then other than this, I don't think you have to definitely see the vitals. Don't forget the vitals after your general examination. So in the vitals, what would you see?
Pulse rate might be low, ma'am, because of Cushing's reflex.
Possible pulse rate, the low volume can be there, and the BP also, that side normally we don't record, other side we record, possible. And pulse rate, you mean due to raised ICT, you mean
Yes,
there
ma'am.
is, yeah? Okay. So that is possible again with the increased intracranial pressure. Yes. And you are going to
Irregular
see the pulse.
pulse.
Why the pulse you have to see in detail in a CVA? You have
And
to,
in atrial fibrillation, it will be irregular.
yes.
In
And
serious
that could
cause.
lead to embolic
CV.
stroke. AFib.
You are going to look for the rhythm abnormalities. Yes, a CVS cause again can be there for causing the stroke. Yes. And again, there can be rhythm abnormalities like atrial fibrillation. It can cause your thromboembolism quite easily. So you have to again, how you will describe in a CVS case, you have to describe the pulse, the rate, rhythm, volume, special character, radio-radial, radio-femoral delay, all this felt in all the peripheral vessels, that you have to say. After the pulse, you come for the BP. Then you have to measure the BP. So how would be the BP in case of a cerebral hemorrhage? And normally whether the BP will be low or what would be the BP? Can you reduce it? Or what should be your target? Abruptly, can you reduce it, or what will you keep as your target? Why you should not reduce it? Suppose if you should not reduce it.
We shouldn't be reducing it suddenly, ma'am. Otherwise, there'll be risk of hypoperfusion to other areas, ma'am.
So you should not reduce it abruptly, because this will again aggravate the further decreased perfusion. This decreased perfuse areas totally cut off when you reduce the pulse. The pulse pressure again determines the mean arterial pressure. So the cerebral perfusion will be affected. Even in a case of hypertensive bleed or in a stroke, if the BP is 180, 100 also, 210, 100 also, don't reduce it less than 160, 100 or 160, 110, something like that. Because if you're going to reduce it abruptly, this is going to decrease the perfusion of the brain and cause the ischemia. That is one thing. So this is about the BP pulse. Then you are going to record the temperature. Then also you see the JVP. So with this, then you come to the higher functions. Now it is the CNS examination proper. Higher functions, you are going to see the consciousness, whether the patient is conscious, he is awake with the opened eyes. Consciousness means awareness of one's own self and awareness of the surroundings. Is he conscious? Is he oriented to time, place, and person? And then is he emotionally okay? Sometimes there can be emotional lability in pseudobulbar palsy. So emotionally okay. So consciousness, orientation, then emotional thing, then about his memory and intelligence. You can test if he can speak well. What are all the types of memory? How will you test the intelligence? Then you have to look for the handedness. If he has a right-sided hemiplegia, or then you say this test you will do. Or from the attendant, you can find out whether which normally is right-handed or left-handed. Handedness, then speech is affected. This and all is there in the how the speech. You have to describe the speech. This is there in the higher function. So memory again, short-term memory, recent memory, long-term memory. So intelligence. Memory, I think you know about short-term memory, the recent one and the long-term. Normally the long term is not affected. So, okay, intelligence, if we can do the subtraction or addition, simple test you give for the intelligence, then you come to the handedness, you say speech. To describe the speech. Have you seen the patient with stroke? So, you have to
But
describe
speech.
what is speech. How is his speech? So, what are all the
Slurred
speech?
speech.
Slurred speech, okay. So then again, it can be complete loss of speech, aphasia or dysphasia, difficulty in speaking. Dysphasia means what type of dysphasia? It is motor or sensory. Motor means what will be there. Sensory means what will be there.
Sensory aphasia, ma'am, the patient will be able to speak fluently, ma'am, but the whatever the patient says wouldn't make sense.
Good. So that is about the sensory aphasia. Here the verbal output is not affected, but it doesn't make sense. Suppose you ask some question, he will be answering something, he will be honest, saying something on his own, something like that. Yes, that is sensory aphasia, Wernicke's. Then you say about the motor.
Broca, motor aphasia, the person will be able to understand, ma'am, but either the person won't be speaking or whatever he speaks won't be clear, ma'am.
It won't be clear. So the verbal output is very less, but he can understand and he can obey your commands. So that is about the motor aphasia. And the areas I think you will be knowing where the motor area for the speech is situated, where the this thing is situated, sensory area for the speech and all. You must be knowing. What is
Uh,
the, is it? Yeah?
Wernicke's area in the parietal lobe, ma'am,
Yes?
and Broca's area in frontal lobe.
Area number, any number is there?
Area
41,
22 and 44, ma'am.
44.
44 is Broca's, 22 is Wernicke's. Wernicke's temporoparietal, Broca's in motor. I think prefrontal gyrus, yes. So this is about the speech. So the slurred speech, is it a motor defect or it a sensory component? Motor means the verbal output may not be there. You cannot understand his speech, but he can understand your obeys your commands. But sensory speech means the verbal output, it would be a fluent speech, but you may not understand, but it will be inappropriate. He may not be able to understand what you're talking. But global aphasia means combine both and this and that. So this is about the speech. Then comes to your higher functions are now over. Now we are coming to CNS examination proper. So CNS examination proper, what you do now? You're going to which order you will follow?
Cranial nerves, ma'am, then
Yes. So
more,
cranial, yeah, cranial nerves, say the order first. Higher functions, cranial nerves,
then motor system,
motor system.
then reflexes.
Motor system covers everything, reflexes, everything.
Oh, then a sensory system,
Sensory system, yes. Then,
coordination,
okay,
gait,
gait. So extrapyramidal, and then you can say autonomic nervous system, spine and cranium,
cerebellum.
autonomic nerves. Yeah, I think we have told about it. Cerebellum. So now we are going with the higher cranial nerves. So cranial nerves, I think you know the examination of cranial nerves. You have attended classes. We want to elaborate on anything, or you want to say briefly, because now at what time we can discuss? We can
Ma'am, we can discuss at 10 or 10:15, ma'am. No problem.
so it is better just we go through quickly to cover everything. So now that is olfactory. Now you are going to examine individual nostril, like keep the object, like you are going to close one nostril and then keep the object, not an irritating object like ammonia. You have to keep some coffee powder or something like that in each nostril separately. Then you are testing the smell. Then for second now, optic now, what are all the functions? That is acuity of vision, field of vision, color vision. Anything else, Pa?
Fundoscopy, ma'am.
Fundus, complete, good. So acuity of vision you are going to do with the Snellen's chart at 6 feet. Or sometimes you can do bedside gross movements, finger movements, and then you can ask him what is that, how many fingers, something like that. But you should have whatever the things you want to test, you should have as a part of your examination during your exams. Then for the field of vision, how will you do field of vision? Confrontation test.
We'll be moving a finger. We'll be asking the patient to fix their gaze on us, ma'am. And they're not
Yeah.
supposed to move their eyeball, and we'll be moving a finger in a head-shaped pattern. Well,
Okay.
moving the finger a little bit, ma'am.
Okay, so you have to close the opposite eyes. Then he has to, you are only moving the eyes. You should not move the head. Yes. And from the periphery to in, like how you said, medially above, then laterally and below. So there are field of vision. There are angles. I think you might be aware. Just see that. I think medially and below it is 60 or something. And lateral use some degrees. So you have to, there are also in perimetry in the optal, they recorded why field of vision is important. Sometimes it may be affected, like why it is important.
Maybe optic radiation may be involved.
Okay, so the patient
Contralateral hemianopia.
hemianopias, you are doing it, yes. And then and again another thing is after the field of vision, you have to see the color thing. You use the color rules, red, green, and blue. You see, and sometimes certain drugs like ethambutol also can cause color blindness. It can. It is actually also hereditary. It's X-linked recessive color blindness. Yes, and then fundus you are going to see if it is a hypertensive, any features suggestive of the hypertensive retinopathy, or sometimes he is presenting with raised intracranial tension features. Is there any papilledema also you have to see on the fundus? Yes, optic disc is edematous and the margins are blood. So now after this, you are going to see the 3, 4, 6 cranial nerves, that is oculomotor, trochlear and abducen, and see the extraocular movements. Fourth nerve, trochlear nerve supplies a superior oblique muscle, and sixth nerve, abducen supplies a lateral rectus, that is LR6 and SO4. Other muscles and the actions, what are all the movements you will do? You are going to, what is that you are going to look for by testing the extraocular movements? What is that you expect? Suppose if the patient is having any weakness of one muscle on that side of paralysis, when he is going to look, he will have diplopia. That is one thing. And he will have squint. Suppose lateral rectus is affected, what type of squint he will have?
Convergent.
Convergent. Medial rectus means he will have a
Divergence.
divergent squint. Then correspondingly, which nerve is affected, you have to see. And then he has to move in all these other things. Then what are all the functions of the superior rectus? Again, elevation, inferior rectus depression. But oblique again, the superior oblique, it is going to cause depression, and inferior oblique again elevation. And we already saw about medial and lateral rectus. So you are going to look for the diplopia on the side of weakness of the muscle when he is moving, and you are going to look for the this thing. What is that? Your squint. Then you have to look for this light and accommodation reflex. How will you do the light reflex? There are direct and indirect. Then accommodation reflex. Again, you are going to bring an object suddenly in front of patient as look at a distance. Fix the eyes on the wall. Bring your fingers in front. Then again the eyes converge and the pupil constrict. Light reflex, you know very well. So, what is the pathway of the light reflex?
From the retina, ma'am, then the optic nerve, then optic chiasma, optic tract, then pretectal nucleus, ma'am.
Okay.
Then crossing over bilateral innervation of the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Then oculomotor nerve nucleus, ma'am, and inferior division of oculomotor nerve. Then sphincter pupillum.
Okay. So now we are, so this eliciting the light reflex, direct and indirect. Direct means you are throwing the light or closing the other eye, throwing the light from the lateral. You are looking for the constriction of the pupil, and indirect you are going to keep hand in between, and then you are going to watch for the other eyes whether it is constricting. Then the accommodation reflex already we discussed. Is there anything left out in testing the 3, 4, 6? I think we are complete with the trigeminal. What we are going to examine the sensory and motor functions. Sensory is by simply testing the sensation over the face. Motor functions, and what is the any corneal conjunctival, again common for your facial and that is trigeminal and facial. Which is apparent? One is apparent, one is apparent. Yes. And you have to test the jaw jerk for the trigeminal. Jaw jerk, if it is present only, you have to say present. Otherwise, don't say the jaw jerk is present. How will you elicit the jaw jerk?
We ask the patient to keep the mouth partially open, ma'am, and we
Yes.
place a finger below the lip, ma'am, and we gently tap over a finger.
Normally, there can be a closure of the, if it is present, it will be closure of the mouth will be there. Yes, that is for the jaw jerk. It need not be present. If it is exaggerated in pseudobulbar palsy, above the level of the nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Yes. So the jaw jerk and then the motor functions, again the clenching of the masseter and pterygoid. Suppose one side the jaw is paralyzed, mean that the jaw is paralyzed, the muscles are paralyzed, the jaw would be deviated, and then temporal fossa. I have to look for any temporal wasting. Clenching, you have to look for the how is the masseters. If that side is paralyzed, then the jaw will be deviated to the paralyzed side, unlike the facial nerve. Facial nerve, the deviation of the angle of the mouth would be towards the normal side. But in trigeminal, it will be the jaw will be deviated towards the paralyzed side. So with this, we complete the trigeminal nerve. Then you come to the facial nerve. Facial nerve, what will you examine?
Motor functions, ma'am. We'll be testing if there's any wrinkling of forehead, ma'am.
Yes, wrinkling, raising, wrinkling of the forehead, by raising the eyebrows. Yes, make a wrinkle. Then,
And if the patient is able to close eyes against resistance,
yes,
if
in
there's
case,
any
yeah,
episode,
yes. Suppose if there is a LMN type of facial palsy, will the patient would be normally in LMN facial palsy, the upper half of the face escapes. Is it only the lower? Sorry, in the UMN, the upper half escapes. In LMN, throat is affected. So, by testing the upper half, if it is affected, the whole face, the half of the face is affected, then it is a LMN facial palsy. Then only the lower half is affected, it is the human facial palsy. So this wrinkling of the forehead and closure of the eyebrows are important to determine if it is an element facial palsy. When he is going to close the eyes against resistance, he may not be able to close completely. You will see the Bell's phenomenon, which is normal phenomenon, upward and outward rolling of the eyeballs. Yes. That is for the closing the eyes against resistance. Nasolabial fold. So it will be not prominent. It will be obliterated on the paralyzed side. Then you can ask him to. Yes. For buccinator, whistle or blow, then you try to tap the cheek easily, that side easily the air escapes. Then in the acute phase, the patient may give a complaint of drooling of the saliva on the affected side. There can be a drooling of the saliva through that particular corner of the mouth. And also sometimes food stays in that particular side of the thing. And any other thing you will test for the cranial nerve, motor is over or anything else. And what about the sensory thing?
Taste sensation.
Sensations over the anterior two-third of the tongue.
tragal sensation.
Huh?
Tragal sensation.
Go.
Tragal.
Okay. So, how will you test the taste sensation again?
With salt, sugar, and quinine.
Sweet and bitter, yes. So, I have to tell the patient to put out the tongue. You should have a placard for each thing, placard with the particular taste written in the language in which he knows. You must have a placard, and the tongue should be always put out, and you keep the substance. And before keeping the next substance, you have to wipe and then do it. The clean tongue. So this is for testing the taste sensation. Yes.
Yes.
So suppose in this patient, in your patient, the patient will have the obliteration of the one thing we left, that is the left side is involved, means the left side nasolabial fold is obliterated. Then he won't be able to whistle or blow. There can be in the acute phase, there can be a drooling of the saliva over that particular side of the corner of the mouth. the angle of the mouth will be deviated to the normal side. That is, right side is not affected, means the angle of the mouth will be deviated to the right side in a Evermann facial palsy of the left side. Yes. So with this, we complete the facial now. Then the vestibulocochlear. Cochlear, you test the hearing with Rinne's and Weber's. You know what is Rinne's, what is Weber's. Weber's, you keep the tuning fork. What is the frequency? 512 on the center of the forehead. Normally it is heard equally in both ears. If it is localized to one ear, means that ear is having the conductive deafness. Then the Rinne's, you first keep it over the bony prominence mastoid process. You strike the tuning fork, the base, keep it on the mastoid prominence. Then when the patient stops hearing it, you keep it in front of the ear. Then normally, which is better, you should hear.
Air conduction is greater than bone conduction.
Yes. Even when the bone conduction stops, he has to hear it. If it is not there, then you assume that the patient is having a conductive deafness. Yes. So normally the air conduction is better than the bone conduction. So Rinne's and Weber's, and then for the in this component, cochlear component, vestibular component, hearing we said cochlear, then the vestibular component, you have to test the semicircular canals and you do this calorie test. Maybe normally we don't do it, but you must know what is calorie test. When you stimulate with the cold water, then what will happen? The patient will have
The nystagmus of eyes with fast component to the opposite side, no?
side, then the warm water to the same
Same
side.
side.
Next house, you know that, yes. So then 9 and 10 cranial nerves, what would be the test you will do? Palatal movement, then
Pharyngeal or gag reflex. No?
yes. 9 is pharyngeal, 10 is your vagus. It is situated in the pons. The nucleus is in the pons. So palate on that side of the paralysis will be low lying. It won't be moving. Here, where will be the uvula? Uvula will be deviated to the normal side or to the affected side?
To the normal side, ma'am.
Normal side. Okay. So anyway, we'll check it. So this is about the palatal reflex. Then the gag reflex, what will you do? You tickle the posterior pharyngeal wall. You must have a basin because the patient will gag or vomit. That is the presence of gag reflex. Yes. Then so with this we complete the 9 and 10. And then you have to come with. So for the facial now, again for the facial and trigeminal, you are going to do the corneal conjunctival. That you must not forget. How we do the jaw jerk for the trigeminal now. Again, common for the trigeminal and facial, you have to elicit the corneal and conjunctival reflex also. Then we saw about up to 10 nerves. What is 11th now? What is 12th now? What is you do?
11th is spinal accessory nerve, ma'am. It innervates the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius. So we see if the patient is able to shrug shoulders against resistance or turn their head against resistance.
Yes.
And hypoglossal nerve innervates the muscles of the tongue, intrinsic muscles.
So you have to ask the patient to put out the tongue and on towards the side of paralysis, the tongue will be deviated. Yes. That is there any fibrillation on the tongue? You also have to look for any wasting of the tongue, something like that. And by sternocleidomastoid, by asking the patient to turn towards the opposite side, you see whether there is any weakness. Yes. So they are purely motor nerves. Yes. Then after the cranial nerves comes your motor testing of the motor functions, which is very important for you. In the cranial nerves, you must know very well how to test the facial nerve. Motor functions, you have to look for the bulk of the muscle. Nutrition on inspection, then you have to measure it. From standard bony prominences, I think you must be knowing from the olecranon above and below olecranon. Here in the, again in the leg, in the thigh and over the, what is the bony prominence in the lower limb?
Patella, superior border, and tibial tuberostium.
Tibial tuberosity. So from particular distance from it, you have how many centimeters in the upper limb? Above the olecranon and below the olecranon?
10 centimeter. 10 centimeter, ma'am.
must know it. I don't remember it exactly, but you must know whether it is upper limb, it is 10 centimeter, but lower limb, you must know. Just see, because these are all the tests you're going to do. So how to do the examination, you must be thorough. Only theory is not enough. So how will you do? Just you get back to me regarding how will you measure the bulk of the lower limb. 10 centimeter above and below, is it right? Regarding the lower limb, yes. So you're going to compare always in the CNS, you see right and left. Right upper limb, right forearm, left thigh, left leg. So what is the bulk measurement? Normally there can be a slight difference. There can be more, 1 centimeter can be more in the dominant side because they are using the dominant side of the arm. There can be a difference, yes, in the bulk. So after the bulk and nutrition, what would you do? You are going to test the tone. Already we discussed passively moving the joint. Increased tone in upper motor neuron, you will have a clasp knife spasticity, passively moving the elbow, flexing and extending, and then wrist flexing and extending, knee flexing and extending. All this you do, and you always do on the right side elbow, then you go to the left side. Right wrist means then you go to the left side. So you are going to compare both the sides. Which side is normal, which side is abnormal. So always do this side and go to the side and then compare and then you put out in the chart. So what is the tone? Right side upper limb, the tone is increase. Right side, left side upper limb, tone is normal. Right side lower limb, tone is increase. Left side lower limb, normal. Or right and left lower limb, it is decrease. Left side, it is normal. So you have to always chart out in your examination chart. Then you see the deep bulk tone, then you are going to see the deep tendon reflexes. Again, we discussed biceps, triceps supinator, whether they are present, just present or brisk or exaggerated, or there is a clonus. In case of a clonus, it's only for the patella or ankle clonus, not for the upper limb. So you just see, grade the reflexes, whether they are present. If they are present, biceps, it is brisk or exaggerated or just present. If they are absent, you mark as triceps absent, biceps present, something like that. Or you couldn't elicit. You can also say it is very much diminished. I am not able to elicit. So diminished reflexes also can be there in the stage of the spinal shock. Yes. So charting out of reflexes, biceps, triceps, supinator. Right biceps you check, then the left biceps you have to test. Right side you have to test the triceps, then you have to test the triceps of left. Then again supinator of the right, then supinator of the left. Then knee jerk, right and then left. Then ankle, right and then left. So here you are doing everything regarding the deep tendon reflexes. Grading already we did. Then you are going to come to the superficial reflexes. Superficial mainly you look for the abdominal reflex, corneal conjunctival, and then your cremasteric. It is needed, or you can need not do it also, but you must know, and the examiner asks, you must know there is cremasteric superficial reflex. How will you elicit it? What is the response? And bulbocavernous and anus also you must know. Then you have to say superficial reflexes, abdominal reflexes. Normally they are absent in women, or it can be present also. If it is a LMN lesion, it is absent. So the inference also you must know. Then you have to complete with the checking the plantar, which is very much important. If there is an extensor plantar response, even with the diminished reflexes also you can say extensor plantar response. The patient is having a pyramidal tract lesion. So right side plantar, left side plantar. So with this we are completing the examination of the DTR and superficial reflexes. Yes. Then you come to the power. So wow, how will you grade the power? Already I told you. Instead of the reflexes, power, normal power, or you come from the zero. Zero, complete loss of power. One is just flickering of contraction is there. Two is the patient can move the limbs only by eliminating the gravity. That means the patient can move when he is lying down on the bed, he can move the upper limb as well as the leg only sidewards. He cannot lift it off the bed. That is gravity eliminated. When against gravity means he has to lift it away from the floor or away from the bed. So that is against gravity. So the arm above the bed and then the leg also off the bed, above the bed, then it is against gravity. that is 3 by 5. Then against resistance would be, you have to give resistance. Suppose you want to test the flexion of the forearm, then you are keeping keep your hand on the forearm. How will you test the power? Tell me, at the level of elbow.
Ma'am, we're supposed to support the arm or the elbow, ma'am, and we're supposed to, when the patient is flexing, we're supposed to provide resistance.
Yeah, so that means you are just keeping in a patient's arm not flexed.
Trying to extend.
Then you are going to put your arm on your hand on the forearm and you are going to tell him to flex the elbow. So now you are providing resistance against flexion. So this is, now you will know whether the power is normal or he cannot do it against resistance. Then with the flexed elbow, you keep it on the other side of the forearm, dorsal aspect. Then you ask him to extend, give resistance. Your hand on the other side. You are starting from the flexed elbow. Your hand is on the forearm on the dorsal aspect. You're asking him to extend the elbow. That is for the extension. So now we are offering resistance. Similarly, for the knee, flexed and extension. For flexion, you have to start from partly extended knee. For extension, you have to start from partly flexed knee. You are going to offer resistance with your hand. So, if we can do it against your resistance, then the power is 4 by 5. If we can't do it, just not even move it, then it is only 3 by 5. Or if we cannot move it against gravity, then it is only 2 by 5. Or again in the bed also you can't move it sidewards, then the power is only 1 by 5. If there is some toe movements or finger movements, that is also not there, means it is only 0. Against normal power he can do it very well, then the power is total 5. So this is about the 5 power. So with that I think the motor examination is complete. Is there anything else, Pa? Coordination is there. That and all we will do with this. Gait, if we can walk, only when the power is more than 3 by 5, he can walk, you can test the gait. So suppose your patient is able to walk with support. What would be the gait in a hemiplegic patient? Describe the gait.
Circumduction gait, ma'am.
Circumduction gait. So the patient will walk, the pelvis tilted towards the normal side. His feet he will be dragging. He will be keeping the tilting the pelvis towards the opposite side, and he brings the foot in a semi-arc fashion. That is the circumduction gait in your hemiplegia. And here the patients also, when you look at the patient, his attitude or posture, that is also very important. He is a complete hemiplegia. He will be lying down in the bed with the elbow flexed, with the wrist flexed, with the fingers flexed, shoulder adducted. That will be the position of upper limb. Lower limb again adducted, and then the knees will be extended and the foot will be plantiflexed. That is the typical hemiplegic posture. Yes. So with this gait, we complete the motor. Then you are going to test for the coordination. Coordination also you can test only when the power is 4 by 5. Against gravity 4 by 5. Something like that only you can test the coordination. Otherwise you cannot test, because you will do finger nose test, alternating pronation and supination. Only when there is some power, normal, at least some power of 4 by 5, you can test the coordination. Otherwise, you can say patient is having weakness of the limb, so you cannot test the coordination. Yes. Or you cannot ask him to walk because of his power is very less. Yes. Then what else you are going to do? You are going to look for the involuntary movements. For the cerebellum, again you are going to test for the tandem gait and all. You can test only when the power is there. You can do this coordination also. You can do only when some power is there. And again finger nose test. All this thing. I'm going to look for hypotonia, pendular knee jerk. Then spine and cranium. You see whether the spine and cranium is normal. Is there any neck stiffness like meningitis? Or in subarachnoid hemorrhage also you can have neck stiffness. Sometimes in the cervical spondylosis also they will have a stiff neck. Yes. And then spine and cranium, autonomic nervous system. Extrapyramidal involuntary movements already we told. So with this we complete the examination. Is there anything else? Sensory we left. So sensory is very, very important. So after the motor, higher functions, cranial nerve, motor, you must remember sensory. So with leaving the sensory, we have come a long way. So what would you do? Sensations, how will you test? Briefly, we complete the sensations, then you will do with the cotton wool.
Superficial
Yeah,
sensations,
sensations, touch,
fine touch, touch
temperature,
pressure, no, temperature, pressure, no, ma'am. Temperature and pain.
pain. Then the deep sensations.
Deep sensations, we have pressure, vibration,
Yeah. Then the posterior column.
Proprioception, stereognosis, 2-point discrimination.
That is cortical. Cortical only localization, 2-point is tactile localization, tactile discrimination, 2-point discrimination, stereognosis, graphesthesia are cortical. Posterior column mainly your vibration sense and joint position sense. That is important for your position sense is for your posterior column. So I will ask you now only the testing of the joint position sense or vibration sense, which tuning fork you will use. You're going to strike it and keep it over the bony prominences. What is
120 hertz, na?
Yeah, you are right. So here for hearing you are using 512. Yes. And how will you do the joint position? You can ask if the patient can position sense for testing the posterior column. The patient can stand with the feet together, eyes closed. He will tend to sway, fall up. Again, with the eyes open itself, he will fall in a cerebellar lesion. That is different. So with the eyes closed, the patient is falling. That is posterior column lesion, Romberg sign. Then position sense, how will you do? You have to ask the patient to either close the eyes and you just flex the one wrist and then tell him with the closed eyes to imitate with the other side. Normal side. You cannot do it with the paralyzed side. Suppose you flex the paralyzed side wrist, then you ask the other side whether he can imitate it with the eyes closed. Then this is one way of testing joint position. Another way is you have to hold the joint on the sides, not on the surface. You should not touch on the palmar surface or on the dorsum or on the sole. Always hold the joint only on the side, because when you touch on the surface on this side or that side, he will feel through the touch. That's why you're going to hold the joint on the sides and then you flex the joint. Suppose if it is small joints like a interphalangeal joint, you do some flexion of the middle interphalangeal joint. Then you ask him which direction is the joint. He will say down. He has to point out, or verbally, if he can talk verbally, or he can point out, say it is down or up, something like that. Or you can do with eyes closed, you can move the joint, the interphalangeal joint down. Then again, you keep it normally, and then with the eyes open, he can say how is it, whether it is downward movement or upward movement. Yes. So with this, we complete the sensations, cortical sensations. Again, you have to do it. Don't use the pin or anything which causes the trauma. Just use something like a pin or some sharp object like a knee hammer, but don't just give any deep pressure to injure the patient. Your aim is not to injure the patient for testing the pain. Again, for temperature, you can have a hot or cold water, or you can use the tuning fork for cold, and then again you can rub your palm and just keep it for feeling the warmth. Yes. So this is about your this thing, sensations. So anything else left for? Just the way of examination only we saw now. So how we are going to summarize? Now we are going to say after your examination findings will be the patient had BP, maybe he had a hypertension. History wise also his blood pressure is 180/100 and he has left side UMN facial palsy. That means the left side nasolabial fold will be obliterated. The angle of the mouth will be deviated to the right and he has a speech defect, that is we take it is a motor aphasia. He cannot talk much, but he can understand what you are saying and obeying commands. The speech is slurred. So higher function, speech is slurred. Then your cranial nerve, seventh nerve, human type, the lower half of the face on the left side is affected. And then pyramidal tract, there is increased tone on left upper and lower limb. The reflexes are brisk. Sometimes like it is brisk like an knee-jerk, easily elicitable. Then the tone is increased. Then the plantar on the left side is extensor. Then power accordingly, whatever is the power you have to say. So with this left human facial palsy, and then left human facial palsy, brisk reflexes and left plantar extensor, the patient having a speech defect of motor aphasia, I would like to say it is the involvement of the lesion is in the right internal capsule due to possibly the thrombosis or embolism of the middle cerebral artery. And yes, this is what you have to say. And the risk factor or whatever it is, a hypertension could be the possible etiology. And I think the investigation and treatment you must be knowing. So far you would have discussed in many classes. So anything else you have as a doubt now? You
Ma'am,
just,
in
yeah.
spinal shock stage of plantar, UM and lesion, ma'am. How would the plantar reflex be, ma'am? Would it also be diminished or can you give an exaggerated?
No, it may not be plantar. You may not give an extensor plantar response in a stage of spinal shock. So you can say very well when with the left-sided facial palsy and the diminished reflexes and these, even though the tone will be decreased, the reflexes will be diminished. The plantar may not be elicitable. But with the facial palsy of the lower half of the face on the left side, human facial palsy, you say the patient is having left human facial palsy, left-sided hemiplegia. But since the patient is in spinal shock and you are not able to get a brisk reflexes and extensor plantar. Yes, you can say.
Ma'am, there was something I read somewhere, ma'am, in plantar reflex about some downgoing, upgoing response.
No, downgoing is nothing but downgoing means it is plantar flexion. Upgoing is dorsiflexion and extension. Downgoing is plantar flexion, downgoing. That is flexion. When you mean flexion, it is plantar flexion, downgoing. So flexion of the plantar means it is downgoing. It is plantar flexion. Extension means it is upgoing. It is dorsiflexion or extension of the great toe followed by fanning of the other toes. That is extension or upgoing. Can you understand?
Yes, ma'am, understood, ma'am.
This is the inference. And you have to practice writing the CNS case sheet. That is very important because you may not get it in the exam immediately. So more history, you have to write the history, of course, but you try to write it fast and the examination should be a proper. Your diagnosis and you must do the needed investigations like a CT brain to rule out infarct or hemorrhage. And you have to examination of the other systems in the CNS is very important. You have to examine the heart. That is very important. Look for any valvular heart disease that can possibly give rise to a thromboembolism. And atrial fibrillation again can cause embolism. Hypertension can cause thrombosis or hemorrhage. So look for etiology, examine the heart, then don't forget to take the blood pressure and look for rhythm abnormality like atrial fibrillation. And like abdomen and RS also, but examination of the heart is very important in a CNS. Yes, don't forget it. Do the needed investigations including your RFT, CBC, but which is important, your CT brain imaging is important, and you have to rule out the hemorrhage. And if it is an ischemia, if the patient comes early, you can also do early thrombolysis with tissue plasminogen activator within 3 hours if he comes. You think if it is an infarction. Yes, if the hemorrhage is ruled out. Yes. And yes, other than this, even in the investigations also, you do a echocardiogram, evaluate how the heart is there any epithecal thrombus. Post MI also they can have a mural thrombus. So all these things are there, you see. Check the heart through the echocardiogram, you do a ECG And do other specific tests you can always do. Even in a connective tissue disorder like a SLE also, patient can have vasculitis, the patient can have a ischemia and infarction. So atherosclerosis can give rise to thrombosis, stroke. So the carotid examination of the carotid, don't forget. Is there any carotid bruit? Is there any carotid atherosclerosis is there? Kinking is there? So carotid bruit hearing is very important. So this and all are very important in a CNS examination. Then again your treatment lies with the, after ruling out your hemorrhage, if the patient comes early, you can do a thrombolysis with tissue plasminogen activator within 3 hours or 4 hours. That is the golden period. After that, you can give an antiplatelet drug like aspirin. And you do rehabilitation is very important because you have to start the physiotherapy early. Whatever the aspirin and other things you give, if the patient has features of raised intracranial tension, you have to reduce it by using the mannitol and Lasix, or sometimes you can use oral glycerol because mannitol you cannot give in the presence of renal failure. You can give oral glycerol. So you give this to reduce the intracranial pressure, and then also I said about the antiplatelets and rehabilitation, that is physiotherapy of the limbs, speech therapy for the speech, and avoiding the bed sores by turning the patient, also avoiding the deep vein thrombosis by passively moving the limbs. The patient should not develop a deep vein thrombosis because he is lying still in the bed. The attendant has to passively move the paralyzed side, all the joints. That is his job, to avoid the contractures. Passive flexion and extension of all the joints he has to do. And again, grasp is also very important. When testing the motor, you have to see how the grasp is. Affected side, the patient cannot grasp the object fully. That is again another thing. So for the grasp, you can keep a soft ball on the palm and then tell him to flex and extend. Roll the ball in the palm or again in the feet. Then you have to take care of his feeding also. Feeding through a Ryle's tube or keep him always in a sitting up position and feed if they give orally to avoid aspiration pneumonitis, and avoid the bed show by turning around in the bed or putting him in alpha bed. All these things are very important. Yes. Yes, Pa. I think with this we complete.
Ma'am, also, if there's any arterial wall thickening, ma'am, would be here a carotid bruit, ma'am?
Arterial wall thickening, yes, possibly you will hear a carotid bruit. That's what I told.
Okay.
Thickening, atherosclerosis per se, carotid thrombus is there, occluded. Per se atherosclerosis, you cannot say. Stenosis, occlusion, yes. Carotid atherosclerotic occlusion of the carotid is there. Yes, you will have a bruit. You
Okay,
can
but
do a
not
carotid
thickening, ma'am.
in the investigation. Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
I can't hear you.
I meant with mere thickening of the wall, we cannot say, if there's just mere thickening of the wall, we can't say bruit will also be there.
No, you have to see. No one will ask you whether this patient has a thickened vessel wall. Do you have a bruit? No one will ask you that. If there is a carotid bruit, you can say the patient is having a atherosclerotic thickening, possible atherosclerotic thickening and occlusion of the carotid. And occlusion of the carotid, again, you have a transient ischemic attack, like transient loss of vision of that particular side. Amaurosis fugax will be there.
Yes.
The carotid is very much important. Again, you must know about the circle of Willis, which I have not discussed, but that also you must know. Yes. I think to some extent we have covered everything on today. Yes, Pa.
And also, ma'am, do we give, other than rehabilitation, is there any treatment for a patient who has been paralyzed and is coming for after 3 or 5 days, ma'am, other than rehabilitation?
We said about the antiplatelet, no? If he is having
Antiplatelets will still be given, ma'am.
antiplatelet, definitely if he is not having a hemorrhage and he has a ischemia, infarct in the brain, you start him on antiplatelet agent. But this antiplatelet agent, why are you giving aspirin? To further decrease this, it is a blood thinner to
Yes.
to decrease the blood clotting. to decrease this thrombosis. If there is atrial fibrillation, you give antiarrhythmics, like give him verapamil, give him a beta blocker to control the rate. And then if needed also, heparin in atrial fibrillation you can give. If there is a mural thrombus, cardiac thrombus, you can give heparin. And again, but you should not give it in a hemorrhage. Always rule out the
Yes.
hemorrhage. That's the first thing. After ruling out only, you are doing all this. Rhythm control for atrial fibrillation, then blood thinners like aspirin. If there is a thrombus in the heart, heparin with and this thing atrial fibrillation. And then again, what else you can give? You maintain is hydration, because sometimes dehydration can cause your cortical venous thrombosis and all. Old age people, they may not drink. And also children, it is quite common. Postnatal also cortical venous thrombosis is common. So also nutrition is very important. So we should not ignore that it is only the drugs which are going to help the patient. The drugs are given, his nutrition is important, feeding, how to feed is important, his position is important, physiotherapy is very, very important. So rehabilitation plays an important role in making the patient to walk and to avoid this residual weakness and paralysis. Otherwise, the patient will be lifelong paralyzed. He will not be independent. He will develop all this bed sores and things. So you do all these things. You catheterize him to avoid all this bed sores. So this is very important other than your drugs. And thrombolysis only in the acute period, within few hours, 3 to 4 hours only. If it is an ischemic stroke, you can do thrombolysis with the tissue plasminogen activator alteplase. The dose and all, I think you have to check in the book. I forgot the dose exactly. Yes. So the homework for you is one thing you have to check where will be the uvula deviated in case of 9 and 10 palsy. Not sure about it. And how will you measure the bulk of the lower limb from the tibial tuberosity? What is the centimeters? That we were not very sure. Other than this, I don't think we have any this thing. How to examine each and every reflexes and the order of examination, you always go through it. Yes. Yeah?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I wish you all the best. With this, you are completing. When are you completing your batch?
By tomorrow, ma'am. I mean,
tomorrow.
14th it will start new posting.
Okay, Wednesday you're starting a new posting.
Yes, ma'am.
So I wish you all the very best and hope when maybe you all can come in person, maybe when things become better, you can also visit wards and then see the case presentations with your time permission. You can come and see the cases. If that it occurs in future, you can come and see the patients.
ma'am.
Yes. Yeah. So all the best. Yes, Pa.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. See you all.